Hi, my name is Michael. I'm 38 years old and I work as an interior designer in New York. I live with my wife Sarah in our cozy Manhattan apartment. We've been married for 7 years and don't have children yet. Sarah works as a lawyer in a big firm and is constantly at work, staying late. It doesn't really bother me, as I sometimes get carried away with projects myself. My relationship with my mother-in-law Linda has been steady, but rather cool. She always kept her distance, treating me with some caution. Linda is a strong and domineering woman who raised her daughter alone after divorce. Despite her age, she holds up well, takes care of herself. A couple of months ago, Linda bought a new house in the suburbs and decided to completely renovate the interior. Sarah suggested my services. To be honest, I wasn't eager to take on this project, but it was awkward to refuse my mother-in-law. "Michael, you're a professional. Who better than you to trust with the design of my new nest?" Linda declared. "We'll also get to know each other better, as we only see each other in snatches." And so, we started working on the project. Linda turned out to be quite a demanding client. We met several times a week, spending hours discussing every detail, from wall colors to door handles. My mother-in-law meticulously studied catalogs, nitpicking every little thing. At times I wanted to quit, but I stubbornly continued, not wanting to let her down. Meanwhile, Sarah and I were growing even further apart. She was constantly staying late at work, coming home after midnight, exhausted and irritated. Our communication was reduced to routine phrases over breakfast. Sex was out of the question. Sarah always cited tiredness and headaches. Work on the design of my mother-in-law's house was progressing well. Linda and I started spending more and more time together. We often stayed until late in the evening, enthusiastically discussing project details. Linda would treat me to dinner, and we'd chat about everything under the sun. It turned out we had a lot in common, from favorite books to food preferences. Gradually, our communication moved to a new level. Linda started to open up, complaining about her difficult life and unsuccessful marriage. She told me how hard it was to raise her daughter alone without her husband's support. Sarah was always daddy's girl. My career, my interests didn't concern her much. "Perhaps that's why she never managed to create a warm relationship with you," Linda said sadly one day. Suddenly, I saw my mother-in-law in a different light. Before me sat a tired but still beautiful and desirable woman. At her age, Linda had maintained an excellent figure, a well-groomed face, and radiant eyes. I involuntarily admired her. Linda caught my gaze and seemed slightly embarrassed. Something intangible began to change in our relationship. It was as if tension arose, a spark of attraction hanging between us. I increasingly caught myself admiring my mother-in-law, casting furtive, lustful glances at her. Linda also started behaving differently, sometimes casually touching my hand or smiling meaningfully. I found myself thinking about Linda more and more often. Her proximity seemed to bewitch me, robbing me of peace. My mind understood that this was a dangerous game, but my heart wouldn't listen to reason. Against the backdrop of my cooled relationship with my wife, my mother-in-law seemed like a breath of fresh air. Next to her, I felt significant, desired, alive again. Sarah seemed to suspect something. She started eyeing Linda and me suspiciously, jealously asking about our meetings. "What are you doing with my mom all day? Surely design doesn't take that much time," she would probe. "Well, you know Linda, she's a perfectionist. So we discuss every little detail," I would justify, trying to avoid looking my wife in the eye. Deep down, I understood that I was on a dangerous path. But there was no turning back. I was attracted to Linda with terrible force. I was completely losing my head over this woman. One day, Linda and I stayed up late discussing the final touches of the project. A storm was raging outside, rain lashing. Sarah was stuck at work again, sending a message that she'd be later than usual. We settled on the couch in the living room with glasses of wine. The fire crackled cozily in the fireplace. Linda enthusiastically showed me photos of interiors from magazines, delighting in ideas. I was barely listening, hypnotically staring at her lips and imagining what it would be like to kiss them. At some point, our eyes met. Time seemed to freeze. Linda fell silent mid-sentence and held her breath. The air between us became electrified, sparking with tension. As if obeying some unknown force, I leaned towards Linda and kissed her. She gasped quietly and froze for a moment, but then passionately returned the kiss. Our hands eagerly slid over our bodies, feverishly tearing off clothes. What followed was like a dream. I remember the intoxicating aroma of her body, the music of our intertwined breaths, the feeling of absolute harmony. We dissolved into each other, becoming one, forgetting about everything in the world. It was madness, all-consuming ecstasy on the verge of recklessness. Afterwards, we lay on the couch, coming to our senses. Linda pressed against me and whispered, "That was amazing. I never thought such a thing was possible." "Yes, it certainly was all I could breathe out, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions wash over me. On one hand, I felt incredibly good next to Linda. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly desired, alive. But on the other hand, a monstrous feeling of guilt towards my wife was growing inside me. How could I have done this? Cheat on Sarah with her own mother, betray trust, destroy the family? All night I couldn't sleep, tormented by pangs of conscience. Linda also looked lost and thoughtful. We decided not to discuss what had happened for now, to give each other time to think. But we both understood that there was no turning back. The next few days turned into hell. I was torn between two women, two poles of my life. Linda and I continued to see each other in secret, unable to control the feelings that overwhelmed us. But the moments of intoxicating happiness were invariably followed by remorse and guilt. Sarah began to suspect something. Arguments would flare up between us over nothing. My wife accused me of indifference, of losing interest in the family, but never once even hinted at infidelity. Apparently, the thought that I could be sleeping with her mother seemed too wild and incredible to her. But I knew it was true. A bitter, unsightly, destructive truth. And with each passing day, the weight of this truth pressed on me more and more. A month passed since the beginning of my affair with Linda. Living a double life was becoming increasingly difficult. I felt like I was slowly going crazy, torn between duty and passion, guilt and lust. At some point, I realized I couldn't go on like this anymore. Confessing everything to Sarah was the only way out I could see. Even if it would destroy our marriage, even if my wife would hate me, I had to be honest. Hiding the affair any longer was beyond my strength. "We need to talk seriously," I said grimly to Sarah over dinner. She looked at me in surprise, catching the alarm in my voice. "Michael, what's happened? You haven't been yourself lately." "Sarah, I need to confess something to you. Just promise you'll listen to the end." And I started talking, hesitantly, confusedly, stumbling, but trying not to hide anything. I told her how I became infatuated with Linda, how our affair started, how I was tormented by guilt. By the end, I was shaking with anxiety and fear. While I was talking, Sarah sat motionless, staring at one spot. It was impossible to read anything on her face. When I finally fell silent, my wife made a strange sound, either a sob or a chuckle. "How could you? How could you do this to me?" she said in a muffled voice. Pain mixed with disgust splashed in her eyes. "Forgive me, Sarah, I beg you. I don't know how this happened myself, but I swear, I repent and want to fix everything." But my wife seemed not to hear my words. She jumped up and began pacing around the room, clutching at her head, then at her heart. Then she suddenly turned around and screamed, spitting, "Get out! I can't stand to look at you! And tell your whore that she's no longer my mother! I hate you both!" From that day on, my life collapsed like a house of cards. Sarah threw me out of the apartment and filed for divorce. She didn't want to listen to me, ignoring all attempts to apologize and reconcile. She also turned away from Linda, not wanting to know her. I was crushed, emptied. I hated myself for the pain caused, for the broken life. I wanted to sink through the ground, disappear, dissolve. Linda also couldn't find peace. She admitted that she had a conversation with her daughter, begging for forgiveness. But in vain. Sarah was adamant. "God, what have we done? We've destroyed a family, ruined our lives," Linda repeated in despair. For the next few weeks, we barely communicated. We both needed time to come to our senses, to realize what had happened. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the pain. I sat up all night over projects, just to avoid thinking, remembering. But life went on. Sarah recovered quite quickly and accepted the divorce with relief. It seemed our marriage had been cracking for a long time, and my infidelity was the last straw. Just before the court, my wife said, "You know, maybe it's for the best. Let's be honest, we've been strangers for a long time. No love, not even respect. So let's part ways amicably." Her words hurt, but I understood that Sarah was right. Our relationship had faded long before my affair with her mother. 6 months passed. The pain from separating from my wife was slowly subsiding, but the feeling of guilt didn't go away. I still blamed myself for the destroyed family, for causing so much suffering to loved ones. Linda and I occasionally called each other, but we decided not to have personal meetings for now. The burden was too heavy, the burden of passion that had shattered our lives. It was as if we were afraid of losing our heads again, of making irreparable mistakes. One day Linda called and asked for a meeting. Her voice was trembling. "Michael, we need to talk, seriously talk, it's very important." After hesitating a bit, I agreed. After all, we should have clarified everything long ago. We met in the park, on the same bench where we once loved to sit and chat for hours on end. Linda looked pale and haggard. Early gray hair had appeared at her temples. "Michael, I have to tell you something," she began, looking at the ground. I'm pregnant. It's yours." My vision darkened. "How? Where from? We always used protection." My head was spinning from the emotions that flooded over me. "How is this possible? You were taking pills," was all I could stammer. "I don't know myself. Doctors say it happens sometimes," Linda sighed, and added after a pause, "I've decided to keep the baby." The following months turned into one endless Groundhog Day for me. I mechanically went to work, but my thoughts constantly returned to Linda and her future baby. Our baby. This news completely turned my life upside down. It made me reconsider my views and priorities, look differently at what had happened between us. Now it was impossible to back down, to run away, to bury my head in the sand. Linda and I were going to have a child together, and I had to take responsibility. I had to be there for her during this difficult period. I shared the news with Sarah. I expected another outburst of hatred, curses, but my wife reacted surprisingly calmly. "Well, that's your problem. I hope you and Mom will be happy in your new capacity. I've been living my own life for a long time, and I advise you to do the same." Her icy calmness only confirmed that our marriage had died long ago. In essence, Linda just accelerated the inevitable. Sarah and I had grown too far apart, fallen out of love, and my infidelity just catalyzed an impending breakup. A week before the birth, Linda and I finally managed to talk frankly. We discussed our feelings, future plans, how we would raise the child. We decided to try living together, to create a real family, for the sake of the baby, and for our own sake. "I love you, Michael, despite everything, and I want to be with you, even if the whole world is against it," Linda said firmly. "I love you too, and I promise I'll do everything to make you and the baby happy," I replied, kissing her on the forehead. Of course, we still have many difficulties ahead. Sidelong glances, gossip behind our backs, difficulties in communicating with Sarah. But now I know for sure, it's worth it. Next to Linda, I feel alive, loved, needed, and I will fight for our happiness no matter what happens. That's such a complicated story, friends. A story of passion and forbidden love that broke one family and created another. Let God be my judge for my sin. But I don't regret anything, because I found true love and the meaning of life. Thank you to everyone who listened to my confession to the end. I hope you won't judge too harshly. After all, no one is immune to mistakes. The main thing is to take responsibility for them and try to make amends. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.